All right, we will go ahead and get rolling for today. Thank you all for being on this Monday morning. It's good to be with y'all. My name is Dwayne Brejek. I'm the Executive Director for the NASW Michigan chapter. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a macro licensed social worker here in Michigan. And I hope you all are in the right place because we are going to be talking about all things licensure. So hopefully, if you're on this call, you're going to be graduating soon or maybe new to the Mitten State and are wanting to learn about the Michigan licensing process. So in our time together, we'll go through and we'll make this hopefully as simple as possible about what the process is to get licensed here in Michigan. We'll also go through the examination and if we've got some time, a couple of sample questions. And then lastly, we'll talk through some of the potential changes that may be coming to the licensing process in the next year or two as it relates to some of the advocacy we're doing. So we'll be putting some resources into the chat, and we'll also follow up with some good things for you all as we leave the session today. And if you're just on, we are recording, so we will have this also available if you want to listen to it later on. I know it is kind of a weird time in social work. I know just over the last few days, we've heard some new proposals about social work being removed from the professional status, along with nursing, counselors, speech pathologists. I think the thing to say in this exact moment related to that is that it's just a proposal. It is not a thing yet. And so while there will be advocacy coming soon, there will be a public comment period for that and expect probably later this week to see an advocacy alert from us with some, we're going to be calling on our congressional delegation to be pushing back around that proposal because we know social work, we're the largest behavioral health profession in Michigan, but all of the rest of those professions that are on that list are also really critical for the success of our communities. And we are going to be working in collaboration with all of those other organizations. But there's a lot changing in social work in our world right now. So please take care of yourself, take care of those around you, and keep following all the stuff that we're working on and ways to push back on necessary things. So today, what we're really going to focus on is why do we have licensure? What is this thing that you have to do post-graduation? What are these letters that I have to get? How do I get them? What is the current process? How much money do I have to pay? We're going to talk about all the real things. We're going to talk about money because it's part of it, right? And we're also going to talk through some strategies about how to get you to not have to pay for all of this process, hopefully. And that's my goal also at the end of the session today is for you to have some thoughts in your mind about maybe how you can get this covered from other people. That is my goal here. And then lastly, we'll talk about the exam. I have lots of feelings about the exam. We've been working on a lot of advocacy for the last couple of years, but as the process is what it currently is, we want to make sure all of our folks can move through it as successfully as they can. All right. So going into the licensing process, the first question that often we ask is why do we have licensing? And really, licensing exists to protect the public. And we have licensing in Michigan since 2005. We were one of the last states to get licensing as an entity. Can you all still see my screen? Okay, great. Sorry, something weird just happened on my screen. Yeah, so we've had licensing since 2005. We are a state that before that anybody in Michigan could call themselves or work as a social worker, even if they didn't have a social work degree. So we were pretty far behind the rest of the United States in regulation. And so when we got licensing passed finally in 2004, it gave us three things. It gave us an actual license, which is the physical document that you're going to get to be able to practice. It gave us title protection, which means in order to call yourself or work as a social worker, you have to have not only a
So,
degree in social work, but a
anywho,
license. Oh, sorry, somebody's off mute. Perfect. Thank you. And thank you, Danielle, for being my co-worker on the line, hey, to help with some technology. Um, but we have title protection. So again, you have to be licensed to be able to call yourself or work as a social worker. And some of this still comes up today where we have folks who are working outside of their either their degree or their licensing type. I actually have had a call last week about a social work police unit in one of the parts of our state, and there's a couple of folks there who are literally their title is police social worker, and one of them has an LPC, not an LMSW. And so that's something that's actually illegal and outside of the scope of practice. So when we see those things, that's also on our organizational end to do advocacy to those agencies because sometimes they don't know, and it's just hopefully a quick fix and giving somebody a new title and fixing it on all of the things. But it's important for us as a professional community to make sure that folks who are using the title social workers are actually social workers. And that also feeds into some of the public misperception when we have folks who are calling themselves social workers who don't actually have the degree or the scope of work that we can do. Um, and so then the last thing that licensing gave us in 2005 was a scope of practice. So that's a defined kind of guide, what you can do with a bachelor's and a master's degree and each licensing level. So for today, there are a couple of questions that I want you all to be thinking about as it relates to your own licensing journey ahead. So if we have bachelor's level folks on the call, are you getting your MSW? If you are going right into your MSW program, you're likely not going to need a bachelor's level license because you're not going to use it while you're in your master's level program, likely, unless you're going to have a side job outside of your MSW practicum internship or your internship requires it, but that is very rare. If you're going to take a couple of years, which a lot of folks do in between their bachelor's and master program, then it may make sense to start your BSW level licensing to get those hours and to be able to work officially as a social work capacity. But if you're not going to be working in that capacity in the in between, you're probably not going to need to get your limited license at the bachelor's level. The other question probably for all of you is, are you planning to stay in Michigan post-graduation? Licensing is not consistent across the United States. They're generally similar, but there are lots of intricacies state by state or jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So the letters that you might get initially after your name are going to vary depending on where you live. The specific number of supervision hours, the test you might have to take are all going to vary state by state. And so it's really important that you know, especially if you're going to be moving to a different place after graduation, what the rules are in that state. So if you're an NASW member, your membership is actually dual into the national and to state chapter. So you can call up whatever the state is that you know you're going to be moving to and say, hey, I'm a Michigan member. Can you point me in the right direction for all the licensing information in whatever state that I'm moving into? Because for instance, many states, the initial licensing letters that you're going to get after graduation with a master's degree is LMSW. For us, it's LLMSW. And our full licensing is an LMSW. So it gets a little bit complex out there. So make sure you know what the rules are in the space that you're going to be moving to. And if you do any sort of international work, that's when it gets even more complicated because social work looks a little bit differently all across the globe. There are some countries that don't have formal social worker licensing. There are some countries that have social work in a very specific field or track, like in healthcare or in hospital settings, where in the United States, social workers do a little bit of everything in every sort of workspace. So that's just a kind of a caveat in thinking about your own personal journey as you go forward in your licensing process. So one of the questions that I get quite a bit is, how do I list my letters? So for y'all on here, could you just drop in the chat for those of you who are graduating? Are you going to be going for your bachelor's level license, your clinical master's, or your clinical macro? And that'll give me kind of a heads up of who we've got in this space today. Okay, this is helpful. So a little bit of every, mostly clinical, but it looks like we'll have at least a couple bachelors and a couple of macro people as well. All right, that's helpful. So in Michigan, we have three levels of licensing. We have associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and master's degree level licensing. I didn't see any associate's folks on here, so we're going to just skip that. So really, there are going to be two types of letters that you're going to get after your name after you graduate, depending on what your degree is going to be. You either are going to be going for the LLBSW, the Limited License Bachelor of Social Work, or the LLMSW, the Limited License Master of Social Work. And then at the master's level, we do have the two designations depending on what sort of job you're in post-graduation. So that's either clinical or macro. And that designation honestly has nothing to do with the track you went through in your grad program. So if you are in a master's program and you are in a clinical track, but you find a macro job after you graduate, you can get the macro license. Same thing if you are in a macro track and get a clinical job post-graduation, you would get the clinical license. Your licensing type is solely based off of your job post-graduation and what sort of supervision you're getting after you graduate. And you do at the master's level you should have the designation listed after your license. So it should say LLMSW Clinical or LLMSW Macro, because that tells an employer or a client what sort of services you are technically able to provide, because each one of those licenses has a different scope of practice that you're able to work under. And you can get both licenses eventually. You do have to choose one track to start. And a lot of folks do ultimately get both clinical and macro at the master's level, but um, your first one will be based off the type of job you're going to be working post-graduation. And you may end up having some other credentials after your name if you end up being in a school setting or getting an addictions credential or another NASW credential. And so you want to have your name listed like I have at the bottom, Jane Addams, hyphen LMSW clinical, comma ACSW. And you'll see many social workers out there have the whole alphabet soup after their name. And that's totally fine. We want to prop you all up for all the great stuff y'all are doing. So as soon as you get your limited license, you'll add your letters on all of your stuff, your resume, your cover letter, your signature line. And that will be what, again, allows an employer to know what you can do and that they can hire you. So as we go through today, I'm going to kind of go through the step-by-step process to get a licensing. To get a license, there are a couple of key organizations or agencies that you're going to need to know here in Michigan as it relates to your license. The first is LARA, the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. LARA is going to be the folks that you give money to for the rest of your life, as long as you're licensed in Michigan. They are the folks who hold your license that you apply through, that you'll send your transcripts to, that your fingerprints go to, that if your name changes or your address changes, that all goes through LARA. Um, that's where you'll renew your limited license or your full license. If you need to file an ethics complaint against somebody, that would go through LARA. And if you need information about like attending a board of social work meeting, that's all through the state of Michigan. ASWB, the Association of Social Work Boards, that is hopefully a one-time relationship for all of y'all. That is your exam. So those folks you will hopefully pay and have to deal with one time and then be done with them. But they are a critical part of this process as of today. And so you need to know who they are. NASW, so us, we do the education for social workers, the professional advocacy, we have examination prep opportunities, professional networking, all that good stuff. But we are not LARA. We do not host somebody's license. And so if something needs to change on your license, your name, your address, that cannot be done through us. Or if renewing your license cannot be done through us, that has to be done through LARA. And then kind of the last one formally tied to the licensing process is Pearson VUE. That is going to be your specific testing site. So when you get to, once your hours are complete and you're ready to actually schedule your examination, you will choose your specific location and site. And that's going to be through a Pearson VUE facility. At least that's what they are right now. It could change by the time you all take your examinations, but Pearson VUE is going to be the space and the organization. And then lastly, you all should be familiar with CSWE because everyone on here is hopefully graduating from a CSWE accredited school of social work. That is a requirement in order to become licensed in Michigan. If you are not sure if your school is a CSWE accredited program, you would just go to cswe.org and you can find all the Michigan schools here. We do not have any unaccredited programs that I'm aware of in the state of Michigan. So if you're in a program that has a social work title in it, you should be good to go. But if for some reason you want to just double check, you can do that through CSWE. All right. All right. And so before you actually get ready to apply for your license, you're going to want to, probably your next steps post this conversation today is to identify your graduation date. So actually the next thing I'd love for folks to put into the chat is when are you graduating? I'm guessing there's some that are very soon and maybe some that are a little bit further out, but that will help guide also what our next steps are going to be together. May, I'll get a March one. That's early. May. All right, I thought there would be some December folks in here. So it seems like most of the folks are spring up. Yet there's one. All right, Teresa, you're coming up here soon. All right, so a couple of folks are a little bit further out. So we've got some as early as next month, a couple of weeks from now, and then a couple of 27 dates as well. So really, as you get about a month or two prior to graduation. So for those of you who are graduating in December, I'm going to ask you to add something onto your calendar as a to-do like next week or probably next week because you don't have very much time before graduation. But sometime about a month or two before graduation, you're going to want to apply for your limited license. That gives you time to get your account set up, and that is all done through what's called the MyPlus system. A couple of years ago, the state of Michigan moved all of their licensing online. You used to have to send paper things in, so it's much quicker generally now, and you have access to your information immediately on the MyPlus system, and that's called the Michigan Professional Licensing User System. And that's where you're going to go to actually fill out an application and create an account. You can track the status of your application. It's where your transcripts and your fingerprints will go to. It's where you can renew or modify anything related to your licensing, including your address and your name. And if you need to verify if somebody's licensed or not. So say you start working somewhere and somebody is assigned to you as a supervisor. You should look up to make sure that they're licensed and that they have the designation you're going for. Because in Michigan, you do have to have a supervisor who's fully licensed and that has either the clinical or the macro designation. And if you're a bachelor's level limited licensee, you have to have just somebody who's fully licensed at the master's level. Their designation isn't as important at the bachelor's level space. So I'm just going to show you really quick. If you go, let me just get out of this doc really quick. And so I want to show you all how you can access MyPlus. So if you go to, if you just Google Michigan Social Work or LARA Social Work, this is what will pop up. This is kind of the one-stop shop for all things licensing. Maybe it makes sense for y'all to just like tab this in your computer at some point. I will also just drop this link into the chat because this is something that you'll probably will go to a few times during your professional journey. Pull up the chat box again for y'all. So here's that link there for anybody who wants to kind of save it right now. But on this page, you can find pretty much everything related to the Michigan licensing process. They will start out with kind of an overview, licensing information, the applications, information about the Board of Social Work. So I'm just going to briefly just show you this page. When you get ready to actually sign up for an account, you'll just click this apply or renew online. It's that easy, and we'll click into that in a second. After today, y'all will want to probably download whichever the licensing guide is relevant to you, either the limited bachelor's or the limited master's. That will kind of be a recap of everything that I'm telling you today. And will serve as and they are in the Google folder I dropped earlier as well. If you ever need to file a complaint, there's instructions on how to do that, information around the supervision verification that you're going to need when you get closer to your hours being finished, and then information on the Board of Social Work. So if you ever want to attend one of those meetings, I'll say the last meeting for 2025 is tomorrow. They meet virtually. If anybody's interested in listening in to one of their sessions, I highly recommend at least one time in your professional career you listen in on a Board of Social Work meeting. Those are the folks who make decisions on disciplinary action. So if somebody has an ethical complaint filed against them, you can actually listen in and hear what's going on with folks and ultimately what sort of sanctions or punishments happen to social workers. Interesting. The rest of the meetings are pretty boring, to be honest, but you should at least one time go on and see, because those are the folks that are representing you all that are appointed by the governor. And then there's just some FAQs, the rules and laws, which that's also something at least once in your career, you should make sure you're reading fully the social work rules and our general laws for social work practice. But when you get ready to apply, again, you're going to just go to this link, hit the apply renew online, and it will take you to the larger MyPlus part of the licensing system. And so there's a couple options here. You can also file a complaint against somebody. You can look up somebody's license, or you can look at professional specific licensing guides. And if you go to the social work one, it'll just redirect you back to that page we were just on. What you'll want to do before you set up an account is just click and watch these super short videos that Laura has put together on how to set up an account. It's really just a step-by-step online application. It's pretty simple. You'll choose what license type you're going for, put in all your personal information. you'll pay a fee. If you, the only thing that's going to maybe be a flag for some folks is if you have any sort of past criminal background, there is a what they call in Michigan a good moral character clause, and so you do have to check a box whether or not you've been convicted of a misdemeanor or a felony, and it may flag some additional something for you. If you do get something flagged from the state, usually what that will then trigger is they will then ask for further documentation or have to set up a time for you to have an interview with somebody at the state. If you are yourself or you know somebody who has a criminal background who is worried that it might impact their license, there is a preliminary determination that somebody can fill out for the state. It's like a form that you submit also, like what was in your background, what's happened since, and then the state can give you a preliminary answer as would this impact your ability to become licensed or not. Now, hopefully by this point in your education, you would need that. Hopefully that would be something that would happen before you even get into a social work program or very early on. But we know that social workers come in with a lot of lived experience, and sometimes that may be complicated for a licensing process. And so there are resources at the state that you can go through if you need to get some additional support there. So that is kind of just the basics of the MyPlus, where it lives on the website there. So now we're going to kind of go into what you also need to do prior to your first limited license. There are a couple of things that you're going to need to do before you graduate or before you're eligible for your first limited license. There are 2 trainings that every Michigan person has to complete in order to qualify for a limited license. All social workers need to have a human trafficking training completed, and everyone needs to have 2 hours of implicit bias training completed. Now, most of your social work programs, especially if you're in a Michigan-based program, are going to have this already incorporated into your content. Usually schools have added this in as a seminar class or a required content, or they have additional webinars or something on campus that will be available for y'all. If you are in a not Michigan-based program, this is something that you would need to find on your own. NASW, we put out events throughout the year that cover both of these content areas. Some of the schools of social work, specifically, I know Wayne State and University of Michigan, both have online courses that you can take as well that will cover both of these contents. And this will be on your application. It will ask you, have you completed the mandated human trafficking requirement? Have you completed the implicit bias training requirement? And ethically, you don't have to submit any documents that say you did it, but you are ethically saying that you have completed those. And as long as those trainings have been completed at least 5 years prior to when you're applying. So if you took them last year, you took a training last year that was on human trafficking or implicit bias, those would count towards your LL. But I would definitely touch base with your specific school of social work if you have not heard about these being offered. And if they aren't, I would highly encourage your school to make sure that they're providing this for you for free as a student, because all of your social work students are going to be required to complete these 2 things before they graduate and are eligible. So as we move into the specific licensing process, really it's 5 steps for most of you, and maybe a 6 steps for some of you. So the first step in the licensing process is to graduate from a CSWE accredited school of social work. For those of you graduating in like 3 weeks, congratulations, you are really almost done. We're excited to have you in the profession, and we are a profession. Social work is a profession, and we are professional. And this is a time where we need really good social workers. So thank you for choosing social work. And again, if you have questions about whether your school is or is not accredited, cswe.org is going to be your place to find that. And like I said, probably anywhere between 3 weeks and 2 months before graduation is when you're going to actually go and set up your online account through MyPlus. Because you can do some of it ahead of time. You can get your name and address and your account set up. You can even get your fingerprints taken, but your limited license won't be processed until your final transcripts are complete from your school. So you don't want to wait until after you graduate, because that may just add some additional time delay in when you get your limited license. So what does application actually mean? That's going to be really step 2. You're going to go to the MyPlus account. You're going to submit and create an account. That's going to be $43.20 roughly for your application. Then you will get a notice that you are eligible to get your fingerprints taken. That's going to be about $75, depending on the specific location you choose. Laura will send you a link of all the approved sites to get fingerprinted. So that will come once you get your application uploaded. One of the things about fingerprinting that I get questions about is if you've been fingerprinted for a job or an internship recently, do you have to get fingerprinted? The answer is yes. Unless you already have a different health license, that's the only time you kind of get grandparented into the fingerprinting is if you're already in Laura's system. But if it was required for your job or for your internship, that does not count. So you would likely have to get fingerprinted. Most people do. And then you really are in a waiting game until your school finishes your final transcripts. So that sometimes can be 3, 4, 5 weeks even post graduation, depending on how quickly your turnaround is in your particular school of social work. And so again, why it's important to have your account set up and have everything else done is so you just want to be waiting for that transcript to be finalized. And as soon as Laura has received the transcript from your school, you'll be able to log onto your MyPlus account every day if you want to. And once you know that your school is sending it, I would check your account probably every day. And as soon as it has gone active, you will then be issued your limited license and you will get a licensing number. It will show up on your MyPlus account. And as soon as you see that limited license is active, you can change your letters everywhere. And that means you can start collecting hours as of that particular moment. Means you can start technically working as a social worker in that particular moment and not before then. And one of the things I think for y'all to note is hopefully you've got some jobs lined up. Some of your internship sites might be interested in hiring you post-graduation. So there might be a really quick transition into the professional space. If you find yourself waiting on your transcripts to be finalized and your employer is wanting you to start immediately, one of the things you can do is if you're in a cover letter or resume as you're applying for jobs, be transparent. You can say, I'm a social work graduate. I will be graduating in May of 2026. I've applied for my limited license. Let's say this is April. I've applied for my limited license, and by the time I'm hired into this position, I will have my limited license. Because there are some employers that will not hire or even interview you until you have the letters after your name, because legally they can't bill for you and they can't hire you as a social worker until you have letters. And I want to make sure you at least get into the interview pool because that is an important part of this process. So if you can be transparent in your cover letter or your emails communication to a potential employer, that's going to be really critical. If your internship site is hiring you on immediately and you have a transition period where you don't have a license yet, you won't be able to do specifically clinical work. And so that might be a training period. Maybe you're doing paperwork, maybe you're doing some other work, but you can't be doing social work until you have those letters after your name. So you want to be very careful about what that transition period looks like. There are things you can do, but it's not anything related to diagnosis or psychotherapy, especially on the clinical space. And so just be cautious about what that transition period, be honest with your supervisors and your organizations that you might be working for, because we don't want you to get into trouble for doing something that you're not supposed to be as well. So again, a couple of weeks prior to graduation, you're gonna apply for this limited license. You're going to go to the MyPlus account. You're going to submit an application and a profile for yourself. You're going to choose the licensing level you're applying for. Once that account has been set up, you'll be given instructions to get your fingerprints taken, which you'll go and do. And then as soon as your university has transcripts available, you will have them sent. Now, the transcripts is really dependent on your specific school of social work. Some schools, it's free to have your transcripts sent over. Some schools have a small fee. So you'll want to likely check with your registrar's office at your school or your school of social work office. They should know what that process for payment looks like. I know when I graduated, I think I got one set of free transcripts that I could send somewhere. And for social workers, it makes sense that it will be Laura who you want that to go to. All right. So that is kind of step two, but it's really the primary step as you all think about what this is going to look like for this process. Once your transcripts have been sent and received by Laura, you will get your limited license. And like I mentioned, that will show active first and foremost on your MyPlus account. You will also get a physical copy of your limited license in the mail. But you can start collecting hours the day that it's available on the MyPlus system. It'll tell you what the date is. Um, and to then go from a limited license to a full license, it is three steps. It is working while you're under supervision and passing the test. It's those three things. And so if somebody tries to make it more complicated than that, it's not. It's working while you're under supervision and passing the test. At least in 2025, those are our requirements to go from a limited license to a full license. Know that your limited license is on a 1-year renewal. So it is $27 per time you renew your limited license. In order to collect the amount of hours that's minimally mandated by the state, it will take you one renewal or 2 years total to finish the licensing process because you can only earn up to 2,080 hours in one calendar year. And Michigan requires 4,000 total hours of supervised practice work. If you find yourself in those first few years out of school, not working or not working in a social work job, and you don't need to renew your license, don't renew your limited license. You don't have to renew it consecutively. So if you find yourself in some circumstance where you're not working or collecting official hours, do not continue to eat into your renewals because currently in Michigan, you are only allowed to renew your limited license 6 times. And so that gives you 7 years of licensing to complete this whole process. And if you don't within that 7-year time frame, there is no way to get licensed in Michigan. That is a cap currently in the state. So do not eat into your licensing hours if something happens in your life. And it does sometimes. People become caregivers, people flex type of work, you might be moving somewhere. And if you find yourself not needing to renew your limited license, feel free to just take that year off or 2 years off. And then when you are back in the profession, you can then renew that through the MyPlus system again. But you only have 6 renewals of that limited license to finish this process here. So going into the specific 3 items that are required of this step to go from a limited to a full, the first thing is finishing 4,000 hours of social work experience. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot. It's 2 years if you're working full time, is what that would take. And you need to be supervised by a fully licensed social worker during all of those hours. And that person needs to have the designation that you're going for. And the 4,000 hours is required whether you're at the bachelor's level or the master's level. Work can be paid or volunteer as long as it's social work. And there's very broad definition of what is considered social work. And so pretty much everything that you do in your job is considered work. We get a lot of questions from clinicians about, does paperwork count? Does training count? Does advocacy count? Yes, everything is social work. And if you're in maybe a non-traditional job and you're not sure exactly if the scope of work that you doing aligns with social work and would count, you can call Laura. They have a scope of practice person that will answer. You can say, I've got my limited license. This is the sort of job I'm in or I'm thinking about applying to. I just want to verify that the experience at this job would count. They can verify that for you. And you definitely want to do that if you're in a kind of a weird position. And social workers find themselves a lot of times in the only one in an organization, or maybe it's a new position in like a corporate setting. We want social workers in a lot of spaces. And again, you're going to still be under supervision in order for those hours to count. When you are working, the state is not going to mandate that you send any sort of specific verification of your hours. So you don't have to send in like your work log or an Excel list of all of your hours. However, you as an individual LL need to have documentation of your work experience because things happen and life's and jobs get weird sometimes. And you want to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row and you have documented your licensing process. So if you're getting a paycheck, then that's great. That works pretty easily as a record of your employment. If you're volunteering somewhere, you may not have anything that's formal. So even if it's biweekly or monthly, getting something from an agency director that could be just an email, like I can verify that this person volunteered X amount of hours this month. And so again, you have something to go back to in a worst case scenario. Same thing with your supervision. You're going to want to have a couple of documents, regardless of how you're receiving supervision, um, as a LL to protect you. You are going to want a supervision agreement or contract written up between you and your supervisor, even if the person is provided by your organization, that outlines how often you're meeting, if there's a payment that's required, do your required liability insurance from both parties. Um, Things like that that just are pretty basic. And then you're going to want to, at least on a monthly basis, have a log that you and your supervisor sign off on. This can be virtual. You could have a Google Sheet, whatever works best for you. Again, just a backup, because what's going to be required when you finish your 4,000 hours is your supervisor or your multiple supervisors, if you've had more than one during your 4,000 hours, are going to have to complete what's called a verification form. And that just lists, it says, I, Supervisor X, worked with this limited license X for this many hours. And as long as those hours add up to 4,000, you're good to go. But things happen. Supervisors die. People leave their jobs, sometimes for not good reasons, or there's ways to not connect with those folks once they're in a different job, or you might leave a job or move. And so you want to document regularly throughout your process, at least monthly, how often you're meeting with your supervisor. Because if something happens and you don't have them available to fill out the verification form, do you have sufficient documentation that the state would look at as an alternative? Because they are very strict. And especially if you're an organization that may be the only licensed person on staff, that there'd be nobody there that could verify that happened. So again, this is kind of like your own protection as a backup there. Um, so when we think about supervision in the licensing context, you really want to be looking at that as professional mentoring. This is not somebody that's just signing off on papers and looking at cases that you're doing with clients. This is somebody who is talking to you about professional advocacy, ethical boundaries and issues, leadership development, how you're negotiating your salary, all the things as a new social worker that you should be thinking about as career trajectory, getting you connected to trainings and networks within the social work profession. Hopefully your supervisor is somebody who's better connected than you are and can connect you to mentors and folks who are going to elevate you as you start your career. I almost think about the limited license process as like those of us who learned to ride a bike at an early age, maybe you started with training wheels and then your parent was maybe holding on to you. Like your supervisor is like the person holding on to you to make sure you don't fall off once the training wheels start to leave. And so they're supposed to be that guide and that mentor to you. Um, so supervision needs to be happening for at least 4 hours per month, and at least 2 hours of those four need to be individual. So what this means is 1 hour per week, pretty much for the entire time it takes you to get to your full license. If you can get some group supervision, I highly recommend it. It's really good to be able to network with other people, to get other perspectives outside of just your supervisors, especially if you end up in a job where there's not very many social workers. If you can be in some group settings, that's really helpful, to be in that sort of setting. So going into a couple of the questions that I see. So are you expected to document your hours on your own, or is there a portal? So there is not a portal, and there's not a specific thing that the state requires in terms of submitting your hours, except for the verification form that your supervisor or your supervisors will fill out. And that is really just a 2-page document that says, I, Supervisor X, worked with this person, this limited license person, from this date to this date for this many hours. And all of those supervision hours just need to add up to more than 4,000, and then that would qualify. If you say are working at a job for 1 year and then you switch jobs and your supervisee relationship ends at that point, have your supervisor at that time fill out and send in the verification form. Even if you're not completely done with all 4,000 hours, you can still have that form sitting in your MyPlus account. And then once you get to the total of 4,000, you would then be approved. But you don't want to say wait another year or two and then have to go back to that supervisor who may not work at that organization or may have moved into a different state, or something like that. So just be cautious about how you document all of that, and be, yeah, just extra careful about making sure that you're protected first and foremost in this process. Your supervisors will have to fill out that verification form. You should get a copy of it. Make sure that they send you a copy of it. So again, if something happens, you have a backup document that's been received, and then that will go directly into your MyPlus account once they are finished. You cannot earn more than 2,080 hours of work experience in a year. Even if you're getting paid, you can work more than that. You just cannot count it for your licensing purposes. And if you are working more than that, please get paid for it. Hope they're paying you really nicely for all that overtime as well. But for licensing purposes, you can only count 2,080 hours in any calendar year. Question, do you have to take an exam to apply for a limited license? You do not. Michigan does not require an examination to get your limited license. This is, again, something that is variable based off of your state that you are living in. There are some states that do require an examination immediately upon graduation. We do not. We never have. I don't want you to. We will never make that a requirement as long as I'm in this organization. So just know that there's no test that's required on our end, for the state licensing. And so the next question, do supervisors sign that verification document when we start our jobs or finish them? They sign those forms when you finish your supervision time. So if you work with the same person the entire 4,000 hours, you can wait till they're at the end of 4,000 to formally send in that form. If you have multiple positions or multiple supervisors, so if you're working two different jobs, you might have two supervisors. And so somebody could be signing off on 2 hours a week and the other person, or 2 hours a month, the other person could be signing off on 2 hours a month. That's totally okay. Or you might have somebody who's doing individual and somebody who's doing group supervision. Totally okay. Just make sure you have documentation of however that ends up working in your space. You do have to only go towards one designation at the master's level to start. So even if your job is hybrid clinical macro, because all of our jobs are, there's really no clinical macro divide completely. We all have a hodgepodge of meso skills, but you do have to choose one lane to get it. And then we'll talk about if you want to add the other designation in just a moment. So once your supervised hours have been sent in, that 4,000 hours of supervised experience, only then will you be made eligible to sit for your examination. So there are 3 examinations that are allowed in Michigan, depending on your licensing level. If you're an LLBSW, you would take the bachelor's level exam. If you're an LLMSW clinical, you'll take the clinical exam. And if you're an LLMSW macro, you will take the advanced generalist exam. So those are the 3 different versions of the ASWB tests that we accept in Michigan. There are a separate exam called the master's exam that some states use. That's the one that states who require an examination post-graduation immediately require. You do not have to take those. If you see study materials that say ASWB master's exam, that is not any of you, even though many of you will have a master's degree, so it will look a little bit confusing. You will either want the clinical or advanced generalist, depending on your licensing type here in Michigan. So once your supervision verification form or forms have been sent into the state, you should be made automatically eligible to register for your examination. If you see that those have been submitted successfully, but for whatever reason you can't register for your exam, you'll have to call Laura, and it's usually just a quick fix on their end where they have to toggle some button. But that does happen occasionally. I'd say probably 1 out of every 10 people have to call Laura to get that added in there. Questions about this section here, because this is the big part of going again from a limited to full. And I see there's a question from MD. I'm going to wait on that question in a minute. We'll get to that one here shortly. All right, some things do come up. We've got plenty. All right. So then step 4, you do have to apply for your full license. So once your supervision hours have been submitted, your supervision verification form was submitted by your supervisor, your exam has been finished. When you complete your examination, those scores will get automatically sent to Laura from the testing site. You don't have to do anything with them. That just goes automatically from the testing site. But you will have to go on and choose that you're wanting to get fully licensed. And that's another fee because there's always a fee that you'll pay another, at least as of now, it's 43.20. This could change every couple of years. It changes like 5 or 10%. The cost, usually it's like a couple of dollars. It varies a little bit. Um, and then once you apply and have that fee, you will then have your full license. And what that means then at that point is you um, have the opportunity, if you are at the LMSW level, to get the second designation should you want. And if you're in a work site that is clearly a little bit more um, easy to get the second scope, I'd highly recommend it. It's one more year of supervised work and the other test. At least those are the requirements right now. So it's about half the requirements that you had to do the first time. So 2,000 hours of work experience and the second ASWE examination. Note that when you are a limited licensee, you did not have to do any training while you're an LL. You had to do the implicit bias and the human trafficking ahead of time, but while you are in that limited license period, you are not required by the state to do any other training. Only continuing education begins once you have your full license. So once you get that full license, instead of a 1-year renewal, you will be on a 3-year renewal cycle. And that's when your continuing education starts. And in Michigan, we have 45 hours of continuing education that's required in that 3-year cycle. 5 of those have to be ethics content. 2 of them are pain management. 2 of them are human trafficking. And then additionally, you have to do 3 hours of implicit bias training every time you renew your full license. You can and absolutely should get training and education while you're a limited license, but those hours won't carry over into your official continuing education because only CEs that are earned while that license is active count for that renewal cycle. But if it takes you 6 or 7 years to complete the licensing process, please make sure you're getting education. A lot changes in social work in 6 and 7 years, but the state does not mandate that you have to do training in that phase. So that's kind of the quick run through of the licensing process. And then I want to do just a quick happy and sad face money. What does this look like? How much is this going to cost? What are the potential um, the low end costs and the high end costs of this process? So if we go to the happy side, on the low end cost of the licensing process. And this assumes that a good amount of things are covered. So you will have to pay an application fee, $43.20. You'll have to get fingerprinted, $75. You're gonna have to renew your limited license at least one time to be able to collect enough hours, $27. You have to take the examination one time. It's $230 for the bachelor's exam, $260 for either of the master's level exams, and then a final application of $43.20. So at the low end, it's about $450, and that's through a couple of years. The big chunks are obviously the exam of $260 at one time, and then the rest is kind of split over however long it takes you. Now, this assumes that you're getting supervision provided, that you're not taking any examination courses, that it's only taking you one time to complete the examination process. But for most folks, this is the side that you're going to fall on too. So when I think through this side and some strategies on how to maybe get things paid for, the couple of things that are maybe the easiest opportunities is if you end up in a space where your internship is hiring you. These are really important things to negotiate or make sure that you know whether they're included in a job. And even if it's not your internship, as you're going through the interview process closer to graduation, you should know before you accept a position if licensing is reimbursed or if they give you a professional development budget. Because say you're given $300 a year for professional development. for the first couple of years, that's going to cover all of this. That will cover your examination, that will cover your licensing fees, that'll cover your fingerprinting. And then once you're fully licensed, that'll cover you to go to trainings, get continuing education. It might cover your membership fees. There are some organizations that will pay for NASW or the School Social Work Association memberships. Those are really good things for you to know before you accept a position. And then is supervision included? Do they have somebody on site, or will they reimburse that cost or pay that out to somebody to contract with you if there's not somebody on site? Because if those things aren't included, we go over to the right side and you'll see same things, still applications, still fingerprinting. If it takes you all the 6 renewals, you're going to be paying a little bit more than $150 for all of those. You have the question mark after the examination. So there are folks that take the examination one time. There are folks on the extreme end that I've heard of that have taken the examination 20 times. Now that's a very, very far extreme, but $260 times question mark. If you take an examination prep course, you're probably going to be paying somewhere between $200 and $300 for prep course. If you're doing something that's formal through either a school or an organization, I would highly recommend check with your school of social work. There are some schools that have free test prep resources for their alumni. I know, like University of Michigan, for instance, they have a whole sample test. You can go to their career center and do it. Some of the schools have books you can rent out as alumni. So it's good to check to see what may or may not be through your university. And if you've got a couple of years before graduation, this is a good time to like poke your school to say, hey, like you should get some stuff for us before we graduate in a year or two from now. Because they should have some things for y'all. And then supervision. So supervision is a wild card. So if it's provided by your organization, it might be free, right? And hopefully that is the case for the majority of folks. But there are plenty of social workers who do not have a licensed person on site or somebody who has capacity. Or you might be in a non-traditional role or the only social worker at an organization. And so you've got to contract somebody out. On average, we're seeing that is somewhere between $40 and $70 an hour that supervision costs. And so if we're just putting somewhere in the middle at $50, you at minimum have to do 2 years of supervision, which is about 100 hours total of supervision. So if you're doing that at the very minimum level, it's going to cost $5,000 out of somebody's pocket. So that if you're paying $50 an hour, 4 hours a month, $200 each month. I don't want $200 out of your paycheck going to a supervisor. I'd much have that come out of the organization's budget. And then there are some supervisors who charge more like a billable hour, $100 an hour. And then that could be as high as $10,000 as opposed to free, right? And if the organization is reimbursing it, absolutely get that fully licensed person all the money. But if it's coming out of your pocket, no limited license should be paying $100 an hour for supervision. And then you still have to pay the final application. So instead of like $450, we're at $6,000 to $11,000. And the primary difference there is supervision. So as you're applying and accepting positions, you need to know whether supervision is included before you accept a job, because that may be the thing that is a deal breaker if they don't provide supervision and you've got to pay out of pocket, depending on what the salary is. Maybe the salary is amazing and that's not going to be an issue. But that's something that you definitely want to know before you start working somewhere. And make sure it's in writing too, that it's part of your benefit package. If they say supervision's included, make sure it's written somewhere, because you don't want to go a year and then they're like, oh, well, we don't have anybody anymore. And so you're just out of luck and you're going to have to pay out of your own. If it's written into your benefit package, or if you can make sure that it's included in writing in what you consider professional development, that's your time during that negotiation phase of a job interview. The other piece of this, I think, especially with the initial application and fingerprinting, because those are going to be the two things that are immediately near graduation time that you all are going to have to be thinking about paying. One of the things I hear regularly from social workers is a way to kind of bring this back to your family. I know, like, you can ask, if you say having a graduation party, if people are starting to say, hey, I'm so proud of you, you're getting your MSW or your BSW, we want to get you something for graduation. Your brain might be saying, cash, please. Like, I need some money. That's totally real and valid. But I think, be strategic and say, will you sponsor my licensing application? Will you sponsor my initial entry into the social work profession. It'll cost $115 for me to get my application and fingerprinting done. That may not be possible, but if you've got folks in your life who are able and willing to give you a little sponsorship, I highly recommend it, right? And I'd much rather find ways for this to come out of somebody else's pocket than your own financial resources. So again, these are pretty drastically different price points in here. And so why it's so important that you're thinking about this now and that you're having these questions on your list of things that you want to ask employers as you're going through the interview process. So I want to take questions now, any questions now that folks have. And feel free if anybody wants to raise their hand too, or just come off of mute. Totally welcome to do that. All right, let's see what's coming in here. Okay, so is it common for supervision to be included? I would say the majority of social workers get their supervision included, especially if you're working in a community mental health or the state, or even in a private practice setting. Usually supervision is included, but supervision isn't always good, or supervision isn't always given the way that supervision is intended. This is not somebody who's just signing off on paperwork and you're talking about cases with. This is a professional mentor. So if this is somebody that is not giving you guidance about your career, that is not talking to you about ethical issues, that's not getting you better connected to social work and the social work profession, that's not getting you more resourced in terms of advocacy and education, that's not what this is. They're not doing it right. And so a lot of social workers also get a secondary supervisor if they aren't getting what they really should be getting from their organization. But I'd say still, it's probably 65 or 70% of folks are getting supervision included through their job in some capacity. Okay, next question. I have an end goal where I'd like to have my own private therapeutic practice. I've read a couple places that this requires different licensing types. Yes. So as a limited license, you are not an independent practicing social worker. LLs cannot own or operate private practices. So let me just say that again. Limited license folks cannot own or operate private practices because you cannot bill under a limited license independently because you're not considered an independent practicing social worker until you have a full license, an LMSW clinical, or in most other states, LCSW is how that is phrased. That was something we were also trying to get changed at the state level to make sure our letters were more lined up, but this law is not interested in that. So an LLMSW clinical is what you're going to need to be able to independently practice in a private practice setting. There's even questions really about like, as a new social worker, should you be working in private practice at all? That's something, honestly, we're getting clarification from Laura right now, but you got to be very careful as a limited license person. There's a lot of organizations that are trying to poach you, and you may be asked to do things that are outside of your scope of practice. I just met with some students at a bachelor's level program that were being asked to do therapy in their internship site. As a student, as a bachelor's level student, you definitely can't be doing therapy. But even as a master's level student, you are not allowed to do independent therapy as a student ever. Like that is outside of your scope as a student. And even as a limited license, you are under supervision for the entire time you are a limited license. So you want to be very careful what those first couple of years are like during that phase. Ina or Enna, see your hand.
Hi, yes. I am currently a student in Indiana, in my master's program, and I'll be graduating in May and then moving to Michigan, around August. Um, so I guess my question is, should I apply, um, through the My Plus earlier because I'm out of state, or is there anything different that I should do in terms of the application process?
Nope. I mean, if you know when you're
Okay.
going to be coming to Michigan, you should still be applying about the same time.
Okay. Thank you. And then
Yeah.
I guess my other question is that I don't know how long I'll be living in Michigan, so would I just hold the limited license, and if I live there long enough to obtain all the hours for the clinical license, great, but if not, would I just practice under a limited license as
Mm,
long as I'm in Michigan?
yeah, it's a good question. So if you start the process in one state and then move to another state, it's might be complicated what that looks like because some
Okay.
states have really good reciprocity, which means you can carry over whatever hours you've already started to collect into that other state. But if you
Uh-huh.
go into a state that has an exam that's required initially upon graduation, and Michigan does not require that, they may require that you go and take that examination. Um, and so there may be some other things that are a little bit more variable depending on how long you are in the first state and then into the next state.
Okay.
The other thing that is generally easier is if you can finish a process in one state and then have your full license transferred over. That is much easier than doing it during the
Okay.
first couple of years. But I would
Okay.
definitely check in if you know what that other state is. Say it's you're going to go back to Indiana. I would definitely contact either NASW Indiana or the Board of Social Work, whatever that entity is called in Indiana, and they can walk you through what that reciprocity process. So you'll either see it listed two ways, either reciprocity or endorsement. That
Okay.
language is interchangeable. So if you do move to multiple states, that's going to be how you see it listed usually in the law.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then I want to go back to MD's question. Are there additional steps to require a license if you graduated years ago? No. Mm-mm. So you still have the six renewals. So if you never started the licensing process, it would still be you go on and apply, do everything that we talked about earlier. It's not based off of when you graduated, how your time is allotted. It's based off how many years you've renewed your limited license. So if you haven't ever had that, then you'd still have all six of those renewals left. Good question, though. All right. I think those are the questions so far. All right, let me go back into the slides then. All right, so we're gonna just briefly talk through um, the examination and what that process is gonna look like when you get um, to that phase of this uh, your licensing journey. So the examination, at least the current one that we use, is through the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB. It's a national exam. There is a bank of questions that exist that uh, it's going to vary every time you take the examination. You'll get a different set of questions. You will take it on a computer at a Pearson VUE testing center. You will get to choose your specific location and test time. Can be morning, noon, night, weekday, weekends, whatever is convenient for you. I highly recommend, like, if you can at all manage it, do not work on the day of your test. It is a very distracting day, and you want to be as focused as you can. Choose the time that is best for your brain when you're on. If you are studying at a particular time on a weekly basis, you're probably going to want to take the test at the time of day that you're generally studying because that's when your brain is going to be thinking about the test and the test questions. Um, the test is formatted in multiple choice. There's 170 questions, whether you're taking the bachelor's, the clinical, or the advanced generalist. Of those 170, 20 of them don't count towards your end score. And they're questions that they're testing out to see if they're going to keep. You don't know which 20 those are. Hopefully, they're all the ones you got wrong. But every question of the 150 that count are weighted differently. And so you need somewhere between 90 and 107 correct answers to pass. So that is a pretty decent range. Um, and you will be notified immediately whether you pass or not at the end of your examination. You get 4 hours to take the test. Um, it is recently changed, and you have two halves instead of just 4 hours to finish it all in one. You will now have two 85 question blocks of tests. So you will take 85 questions, you will get a short break, and then you will be able to reset and finish the remaining 85. Um, once you finish that first 85, you are not able to go back to that block. So you will have an option to check, I want to flag this question and go back to it. And you can do that before you finish that first round or the second round. But you won't be able to go back into that first section once you've completed it. If you need additional time and other accommodations, you can absolutely ask for that. You need to make that known pretty much immediately when you schedule your specific testing site, because if the testing center needs to have another or an alternative room available for you, they can do that. So just make sure that if you are seeking accommodations, that you're doing that early in this process. Maybe the best part of this test, if there is a best part, is you do know when you leave whether or not you've passed or not. So you will get a printout of your score at the front desk once you finish your test. They used to tell you on your screen, but that has changed. And so you will get something that will says, congratulations, you needed this many out of this many for your particular test. This was what your score was. Or you'll get something like needs further study. Here's what the required score was. Here's what you did. And here's the kind of the content areas and how you did in each section of the test. It won't tell you specific questions, but it will tell you kind of the areas that you did best or not so good on the particular examination. On the test day, you will need to make sure that you have your ID and that it matches. They will scan your palms, which I had never had done before, though that was a little bit weird. But that's kind of instead of fingerprinting, they do palm scanning. And all ASWB testing sites are intended to look the same. So you're going to be, whether you're taking it in Detroit versus Traverse City or in Lansing, it's all supposed to be a consistent environment. They're pretty sterile. You're just going to basically be in a room of cubicles where there's one wall that's a glass wall. So you've got like whoever the staff are that's monitoring and make sure if there are folks that need anything, they're behind that. And then you'll be in there with other social workers, plumbers, nurses, could be a whole hodgepodge of professionals taking their examinations. Um, when you get to your test, there are a couple of things that you're going to want to watch out for as you begin studying. There are really two types of questions that show up on our examination right now. There's direct questions or statements, or case vignettes. So the case vignettes will give you a little story about a client, and then you have to answer a question based off of that. The direct questions or statements, those ones are a little bit more clear. It might be, if you're taking the clinical exam, it might ask you like which drug is best used to treat X thing, or based off of this theory, what would you do? And then a case would be, you've got a client in a school who's coming in for X type of thing. What do you do first with this client? And you'll want to start at least in your brain as you're studying, like where is the setting? Are they in a school? Are they in a hospital? Are they in a private practice setting? Are they in a community agency? Because that's going to somewhat dictate kind of the answer you might give. And then what are the critical words? Does it say, what do you do first? What is the best answer for this? Because some of the questions will have all technically correct answers. And so that critical word may be the thing that helps guide you to the correct one out of there's three options that the exam is switching to. It used to be a 4-question test. It is moving to a 3-question exam. In the Google Drive that you'll have access to, you'll see the ASWB content areas. So for your specific exam, you can look up what content area is broken down by section in your particular test. And you'll want to download whatever the most recent one is when you get ready to take your exam, because they do change every couple of years. They review the test content. And so for some of you, by the time that you're ready to take the test, it will be altered a little bit. Client safety is always a first consideration in the examination, so you probably will have a question or two related to that. And like I mentioned, you will have an opportunity to flag questions and come back to them. So one of the things that really trips a lot of people up is test anxiety. And if you know you're an anxious test taker or maybe have not taken a standardized test in a long time, the more studying you can do, the more skills that you can do as thinking about how to manage anxiety during that session is going to be really helpful for your success. And some of that is not taking too much time on any one question. and just trusting your gut. Because once you've been studying for sometimes months on this, you'll have a good sense and hopefully be able to trust yourself. Our exams cover three primary types of skills or cognitive abilities. Recall, so those are descriptions and definition questions. Application types of questions, which are using rules and laws. And then reasoning, which are more judgment based. So those are usually tied to the case studies that are given. If you're only taking the bachelor's level exam, you won't get any reasoning questions on your test. Um, so I'm going to skip just briefly over those. We might come back to do a sample question, but I want to make sure we get through the rest of the content and then give you all some couple minutes for questions if we have final ones. So things to just be prepped for when you're preparing to go on to your actual test day. Know where you're going. I know that may sound pretty basic, but your test time starts whether you are in the building or not. So make sure you are there and checked in, and you've maybe done a drive-by or know where at least the location is. Make sure that you've brought an ID and that matches what you've registered as. So if your name changes for whatever reason before when you schedule the test and when you actually get to the site, you want to make sure that that gets synced up because they very well will turn you away if your ID does not match. And you do not want to just toss $260 or $230 into the trash. Pretty basic stuff. Oops, sorry to skip ahead there. Um, Make sure you're reading all of the questions. Take your time. You have plenty of time to get through these questions. And one of, I think, my two favorite pieces of advice is just read what's on the question. And that ties into if it doesn't say it, don't assume it. So you all have a lot of experience and a lot of interactions with clients, with communities, and you might read a question that's in your brain. You're like, I had this exact experience with a client. No, you didn't. Because your client is much more complex than what the answer and what the question is actually written. Because they have determined in 2 to 3 sentences that is enough information to answer what the question is. So always only go off of what is in the question. Don't assume something is related to an experience you had or a client situation you had, because your organizational policies might be slightly different than what a general social worker would do. And this test is written in the way that you have to think about yourself as you are a social worker anywhere in the United States or Canada doing any type of social work in any sort of agency, unless it's very specifically listed, but they usually aren't. So again, I hate to say like take off of your practice hat, but you really have to think in a generalist way when you are thinking about this examination. You're not going to be able to cram for this study. I think everybody who's taken this knows at least one person who passed this without studying. They're some genius or super lucky test taker people, but that is most folks are. You're going to need to probably give yourself a few months of slow study. Um, Take a couple of hours. It says 1 to 2 hours per day, but that's really like 1 to 2 hours probably per month early on. And then as you get closer to, you're all graduating with bachelor's or master's degree, your study patterns, if you're a procrastinator, if you're going to need a study buddy, that's going to be the person that's going to drag you to Starbucks or wherever to have a partner in this. I recommend if you take a prep course that you have a friend do it with you because that person will pick up different things. It's good to have somebody who can help be accountable in this process. Definitely check in with your school of social work to see what free things that they provide for you. And if there's an opportunity to do something regionally or maybe even within your organization, if there's a few limited license folks who are trying to test at the same time, practice together. We post sample questions on our Facebook. It's not every week, but we do post them on our Facebook. Go into your app store, whatever sort of phone you have, put in ASWB bachelor's exam, ASWB clinical exam, ASWB advanced generals. There are some apps there. Note that none of those apps that you will find in your app store are actually written by ASWB, even that they very well look like they are. None of them are from ASWB directly. So none of the questions you will find exactly on your test, but they are good additional tools to get sample questions. And some of the apps you can even specify, I have 10 minutes. I want to look specifically at ethics related questions, or I want to look at diagnosis questions. Because you're going to find you have areas of expertise already just because of your skill set and the type of practice you're in. And there's going to be other parts that you're like, I don't work in this scope of practice at all. Since I was at NASW, the ethics stuff was super easy for me. The supervision and kind of more macro management questions were super easy for me, but I had to definitely focus in on some of the diagnosis or the theory that might have been a few years since I've had to really think about some of the theory pieces. So as you're like actually graduating as well, think about what textbooks or course materials you will want to keep. Stuff that's generalist enough. If you're taking a very specific class about trauma and veterans, you're probably not going to have a lot of questions related to that. But if you've got a course on social work theory, especially some of your early intro classes, whether that was BSW or maybe first semester MSW, those resources might be good to keep. Having a code of ethics copy, also a good resource to have. And ultimately, you just want to see that congratulations and that passing score. Most jobs don't give you a larger bonus because you've passed a higher score. Hopefully, you get a raise and maybe a new job title when you get your full license. But ultimately, the goal is for you to pass. Every summer, at least once a year, we do a virtual licensing exam institute. So that's a really good resource that also comes with a 6 months online community that you can participate in. There's online flashcards and quizzes and a network where people can share and post questions on there. And then we also partner here in Michigan with a group called Pass It Pro. They are a social work prep company that was developed by a non-traditional older social worker who failed the exam for the first time. And so they brought together folks from kind of non-traditional social work spaces to really talk through for folks who haven't taken examinations in a substantial amount of time, who might be in social work at an older age, who need maybe more individualized tutoring. And so they have a few options as well through their organization, and we like those folks. But there are tons of prep stuff that are out there. So please take something that's reputable, either from something your school recommends, one of the large social work organizations. There are a lot of fishy looking licensing prep things online. Not to say they're all bad, but just be careful where you put your money and your time, because we want to make sure that how you're thinking about this is going to ultimately get you passed in the end. And so I just want to just briefly talk. I know we've got about 10 minutes left for today about what might be next for licensing in Michigan. So as we've already talked today, we've had licensing for actually just about 20 years now. During that time, there's never been any changes into our licensing law or any adjustments made to our current process. COVID had huge impacts on our social work practicing and how people were practicing telehealth. There are so many folks who have transitioned into different sorts of social work practice. The last few years have also seen huge growth in calls around anti-racism work and how do we look at our own licensing and regulation and where there may be unnecessary gatekeeping happening. Workforce shortages we're seeing across social work. And then lastly, in 2022, the ASWB, the Association of Social Work Boards, the people who write the exam, finally released data related to their examination, which we'd been asking for since the 80s. And so if you haven't checked out this, please go to aswb.org/exam/contributing to the conversation, and you can find all of the data. But in a brief snapshot is there's huge racial, age, and language disparities in our social work examination, sometimes by 30 or 40%, based off of certain demographics within our test. And as social workers, as a profession that's called to look at racial justice and equity and financial equity, this has really expedited the need for reform. In Michigan specifically, actually, I'm going to skip over this slide because this one I think is more clear. In 2023, this was our data based off of our test takers here in Michigan. So you can see at the bachelor's level, there's only 77 total number of folks who took the bachelor's level exam. It's very few people. Most of our folks are clinical. We had about a 65% total pass rate which is actually okay. 85% first pass rate. We're happy with that rate. But if we go down to the clinical, which is 95% of all of our test takers in Michigan, you can see we had a 36.1% pass rate on our clinical exam. That is horrendous and should be a call for every social worker to be up in arms about doing something about this test. And just in that 1 year alone, our social workers who failed the exam paid over $337,000 in exam fees. And so we know that there is some large structural issues with how this test is and our pass rates across the country. Michigan is not the only state that has pass rates like this. But I think it's important for y'all to be able to be a part of this because this is impacting you all directly and is one of the largest professional workforce issues of, I think, this generation to help address. So we are working on some licensing and have been working on some licensing and regulation changes. We are hoping to create an alternative pathway that allows folks to be able to get fully licensed without having to pass the examination. And that would look like an additional year of supervised hours if someone is not able to pass the examination, as long as they haven't gotten ethical violations in that period. And some other states have already started to move in that direction. We're also looking to clear up some language related to supervision as well. So I would expect probably in the next year or two, the legislature is really weird right now here in Michigan. Since we are a split House and Senate, there's very little legislation moving. And since next year, pretty much the entire legislative body is up for election, we do not anticipate to see much legislation moving at all on anything. So I still am very optimistic that we will see our bills move, but it is a long game as well. So please keep following us. Here's my contact information. I wanted to make sure you all have that if you need to reach out to me directly. Please follow us on all the social medias. Find me on LinkedIn if you want as well. But I want to we've got 5-6 minutes left, so I wanted to give us some time for any other last questions y'all have. And I'm going to mute because there's a phone ringing behind me. So give a chance for folks to drop questions in the chat, or if folks want to raise their hand. All right, I see a couple of questions in here. I'm going to start from KJ. Are there any recommendations for how early we should be applying for jobs pre-graduation? Great question. There are some folks that I know that start like 4 or 5 months out from graduation. I would say most jobs probably won't hire you until you are closer to graduation, or graduated and have the letters after your name, especially if you're in a clinical job. But I will not say that's every place. There are some places that you'll at least want to get through the interview process because you're applying, say, for something through the state. It may take 5 months for them to even get through the interview process for somebody. And that is the real, in some organizations, it is a long time before they actually hire somebody from when the interview process happens. And so I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but you want to be as transparent as you can in whatever time frame is going to work for your application process, to let the agencies know when you graduate, if you have applied for your limited license or not. And as soon as you have, put that in your cover letter or email to an organization as you're applying for them. And then once you hopefully get to the interview, you can also say that verbally, like I'm graduating in May. I will have my limited license by the time I'm accepted into this position. But you may need to also then reapply for certain jobs as well. Because if you notice that you're not getting interviews consistently, it's very possible that they are because you don't have the letters after your name. And so it may make sense for you, if those jobs are still of interest to you, to reapply once you officially have those designations. All right, Therese asked, what are the odds that this test will go away in the next 2 years? Not likely. So even when legislation gets passed, it will take about 18 months for it to become law. So the process will be the process for probably at least 2 years. And the reality is the legislature is not going to move anything quickly enough through the end of 2025. So my hope is that if we can get a bill passed, it would be by the end of next year. So that really wouldn't take effect until 2028 formally.
Thank you. One could only wish.
yeah. And trust me, if I had my magic wand, it would already be changed by now. But it is a very, very frustrating legislative environment right now. And the piece I'll also add to that is like, please help us get some better people elected next fall. That's going to be also the goal is to get the right people in that we can move some of our stuff forward, both at the state and the federal level. It is a very challenging time in social work advocacy. Um, all right, so it looks like, all right, Marina Pocket Prep question. My school gifted us premium access. Great. I love that the school is giving access to an app. Uh, just know that Pocket Prep is not ASWB. I guess I'll just say that caveat again. So like don't rely just on one type of study because an app is great. It gives you a lot of content in whenever you're available to do it. But um the only thing that's going to be, or the thing that's going to be the most related to what you'll see on your actual test is ASWB does allow and pay, have a paid for practice exam. I think it's like $85. And you get, I don't know, 3 months or 6 months to have access to take that. I don't like anybody having to give them any more money as an organization, knowing how problematic their test is. So that's like the challenge is like one regard, they are the closest to what you're going to see on your actual exam because it's them, and they're using past questions that have been on the test. So, I mean, I think it's really great. I think your school giving you any sort of resources is a really good step. But don't just rely on one thing. And again, this is where like your internal network. So if you've got friends who are using a book, maybe you've got somebody who's going through a course, if you all can share your resources collectively, that's a really good option to get some different materials. Um, all right, what's the authorization form we need to take to the test? So there's no authorization form that you need to do to take the test. When your supervisor fills out the verification form while you're finishing up your limited license process, once that has been completed, that gets added into your MyPlus account or sent to Laura directly from your supervisor. And then you will be made eligible to sit for your examination. If you find on your account through MyPlus or you go to aswb.org and you can't pay, it says you're not authorized, you would need to call Laura and they'll just usually click a button on their back end and fix it for you. When you go for your testing site, that's when the names must match. So if you schedule your exam and say you got married and your name changed and that changed on your ID, but you didn't actually change it on your registration, they could not let you take your examination potentially because your name needs to match on how you registered for your test versus what's on the actual ID that you're bringing to the site. Yeah, good question. Well, I know that was a full hour and a half, so thank you all for like sticking with it. I hope this was helpful and gave you the general framework. It's a lot of information, I know. And for those of you who are graduating in like minutes from now, again, congratulations. Go online, fill out your application, get that done like ASAP. For those of you who've got a little bit of time, I'm glad you're here. It's sometimes helpful to hear this a couple of times because it's not complicated, but it's a lot. So like if you can start filtering it a few times and probably maybe a couple of months prior to graduation getting again, I think that will stick. But if you all need anything after today, please reach out. We're available and we're usually easier to get a hold of than Laura. So please reach out. And thank you, Danielle, for dropping that licensing resource. Yeah, we've got a couple of web pages. That's where this link will then also go up for this video if you want to check in after today. But really appreciate you all. I hope everyone has a good holiday week and get some self-care. Please relax. It is a weird time in the world, so take some time to just enjoy yourself and your family. And I appreciate you all and have a good rest of your week, everybody.